Now I'd like to show you what other things we can do with the non-static methods. If we create another class, we create another file inside of the classes folder, we call it test2.php, open a PHP tag and create the class test2, opening and closing curly brace. Now if we create the public method function getUser2, and we'll pass one parameter to this method called obj for object. Inside of this method we're going to return obj and a parameter from this object called last name. If we go back to our test.php, you can see our test class has a non-static parameter called last name with my surname assigned to it. Now if we go back to our index.php, let's remove this static method here, which is echoed, and the same about this getUser method. We have our new test class instantiated, so we have object of our class here called obj test. Now if we create another object, test2, which will be our new class test2. So we have two object instantiated now. If we use our second instance and we call our newly created method, which is getUser2, and as a parameter we'll pass the instance of the previous object, instance of the previous class, and we echo this method. We go back to the browser, refresh, you can see it's taking actually the parameter from the previous object and displays it on a page. Because what we've basically done, we passed the object, which is the instance of our test class, and this specific test class has a parameter called last name, which is non-static, and we call this directly through the object. So the object instance has been passed to this method. We use this method as a new instance of the class, and obviously we returned the non-static parameter from this class. So that's all fine, nothing too fancy about this, that's absolutely fine. Okay, now let's use this instance of a first object and let's modify the value assigned to the last name. So last name equals, let's say, Smith. Okay, let's have a look at what's going to happen now. If you refresh the page, hey, the value has changed. As you can see, if we create the instance of the object, then we affect the values of the parameters or methods inside of this object, and then pass the instance of this object to the next method of the other object, then the other object will get the values, the affected values, and will be able to use them in whatever way they decide to use it actually. So as you can see, we've got this affected object here, and then we could call the affected changed name already, which has been obviously changed before the instance of the second class has been created, and obviously the method from this object has been called. So this is actually one of the examples where instantiated classes are so useful. As I've previously mentioned, static methods are obviously useful when you need to have access to something instantly, and you use these methods very often, like date, let's say, formatting date and time, or calling URL parameters, which are called nearly in every single on every single page, or any plenty of different classes. So these kind of things you would use static methods and parameters. Obviously for things which need a little bit more work around, let's say, calculating things, modifying depending on the values, depending on different aspects, then you would most probably use non-static methods. So don't worry if it's still a little bit too difficult and you still don't get it quite yet, because we will be working with the classes quite a lot during this series of the videos, so I'm pretty sure that at the end of this series you will have a solid understanding of the classes in PHP. Now before we move to the next chapter, let's clean up a little bit. Let's remove all these instances of the classes from the index, uncomment these 2 lines, and get rid of these temporary test files from our classes folder. Okay, so that's it. Let's move to the next chapter.